200 feet below a major city, there's a tunnel wide enough to drive a bus through, lined with fresh concrete, wired for lighting, fitted with ventilation shafts that have never once needed to clear exhaust from a single car. It cost well over $1 billion to build. It took over a decade to finish. And on the day it was completed, engineers sealed the entrance and walked away because the tunnel cannot legally be opened to the public it was built for. This isn't a story about a project abandoned halfway through, and it's stranger than that. A tunnel finished, inspected, and functional that sits unused not because it failed, but because of what happened everywhere else while it was being built. Tunnels take longer to build than almost any other piece of urban infrastructure, and that time lag is exactly where this story lives. A tunnel approved today is designed around the traffic patterns, safety codes, and political priorities of today, but it won't open for 8, 10, sometimes 15 years. In that gap, cities change, regulations change. The very problem the tunnel was built to solve can quietly disappear or transform into something the tunnel was never designed to handle. Most of the time, this lag is harmless. Cities are patient enough and need stable enough that a decade-long build still opens into a world that needs it. But every so often, the gap between approval and completion becomes wide enough that the finished tunnel and the world above it stop matching each other entirely. Picture the day the final concrete pour is finished. Structural engineers sign off. Fire suppression and ventilation systems pass every inspection. By any technical measure, the tunnel works exactly as designed. And yet it doesn't open, not for months, not for years, sometimes not at all in its originally intended form. The reason is almost never structural. It's almost always regulatory, financial, or political. A safety code updated after a major tunnel fire disaster somewhere else in the world renders the ventilation design perfectly adequate when approved, no longer compliant for the vehicle types it was built to carry. A change in a country's environmental permitting process, adopted years after construction began, retroactively requires an entirely new impact assessment before a single vehicle can legally pass through. A funding partner central to the project's operating agreement withdraws, or a change in government cancels the toll structure the entire business case depended on, leaving a physically complete tunnel with no legal, financial, or regulatory path to actually opening. There's a quieter version of this story too, less dramatic than an outright sealed entrance. Tunnels that do open, but years late and at a fraction of their intended capacity, running a reduced service indefinitely, while the agency responsible avoids drawing attention to how far short of the original plan the operating tunnel actually falls. The first hidden reason is what tunnel engineers privately call design freeze risk. Once a tunnel's route, diameter, and ventilation system are locked in during the design phase, they're essentially impossible to meaningfully change without re-excavating, meaning a tunnel approved under one set of safety standards is often physically incapable of being cheaply retrofitted to a new set adopted a decade later. Above ground, a road can be repainted, a lane reassigned, a barrier moved. Underground in solid rock, almost nothing can be casually adjusted. The second hidden reason is what happens when a tunnel is designed around a single anchor use. A specific class of heavy vehicle, a specific rail gauge, a specific volume of a particular kind of freight, and that anchor use disappears before the tunnel opens. A tunnel engineered for a rail freight corridor that made commercial sense when ground was broken can become obsolete if the industry it was built to serve relocates, automates, or shrinks over the build period. The tunnel isn't wrong, the economy around it moved. The third and most bureaucratically brutal reason is jurisdictional overlap. Major tunnels frequently cross the boundary between multiple government authorities, a city, a state, or provincial government, a national transportation ministry, sometimes an international border. Each of those authorities can have separate approval requirements, and if even one of them changes its rules, or if the political coalition that originally aligned all of them shifts after an election, the tunnel can be caught in a limbo where every individual authority insists the delay isn't theirs to resolve. A fourth reason compounds all three. The specialized contractors and tunnel boring machines used for a mega project are typically demobilized the moment excavation finishes, meaning that if a design change becomes necessary afterward, remobilizing that same specialized capability, sometimes a machine custom built for the specific diameter and geology of that one tunnel, can cost nearly as much as the original excavation itself. This turns even a relatively minor required modification into a decision that competes financially with having built an entirely new tunnel from scratch, which is exactly why authorities so often choose to simply leave a finished tunnel sealed rather than reopen the immense cost structure required to fix it. Consider what has happened in some form in transit systems around the world. A subway or rail tunnel bored years ahead of the station infrastructure meant to connect to it, only for funding for those connecting stations to be delayed or canceled, leaving a fully excavated tunnel running between 2 points that were never actually finished as usable stations, sealed and mothballed rather than demolished, because tearing out a completed tunnel is often more expensive than simply leaving it dark underground. Or consider road tunnels built to relieve a specific choke point, only for the vehicle size or weight restrictions ultimately imposed, often following a fire or structural failure in an entirely different tunnel on another continent that prompted a wave of new international safety codes. To exclude the exact category of heavy freight traffic the tunnel was originally justified by. The tunnel still moves cars, it just can't move the trucks whose diverted traffic was the entire economic case for building it in the first place, leaving toll revenue projections that never come close to reality. In some of the most extreme cases, tunnels built to connect two sides of a strait or a border have been finished on the engineering side years before the political or diplomatic agreements needed to actually operate cross-border service were finalized, leaving a completed physical connection between two countries that remains legally closed because the treaty governing customs, security, and rail operating rights was never signed. The financial damage compounds in a particularly cruel way. Unlike a canceled project where spending simply stops, a finished but unusable tunnel still requires maintenance to remain safe and structurally sound, ventilation systems tested on schedule, drainage kept clear, structural inspections carried out on a regular cycle, all while generating zero revenue and providing zero public benefit. The debt used to finance construction, often bonds sold to investors expecting toll or fare revenue starting on a specific date, continues accruing interest with no offsetting income, forcing governments to either default, restructure, or quietly absorb the cost through general taxation, effectively making every taxpayer fund a tunnel most of them will never be legally permitted to drive or ride through. The insurance and liability picture compounds the problem further. A completed tunnel still represents a structure that must be insured against fire, flooding, and structural risk regardless of whether it carries a single vehicle, and insurers pricing that risk have little historical precedent to draw on for a tunnel that has never operated, often defaulting to conservative, expensive premiums that assume worst-case usage patterns, adding yet another fixed annual cost to a project, generating no revenue to offset it. Communities disrupted during construction, homes relocated for surface access points, businesses that tolerated years of tunnel boring vibration, and road closures on the promise of the transit or traffic relief the finished tunnel would bring, often experienced the worst version of this outcome. They paid the full social cost of construction and received none of the promised benefit because the tunnel that was supposed to run beneath or beside them never opened at all. This story matters because it reveals something almost no one thinks about when they imagine wasted infrastructure. Waste doesn't always look like an abandoned, half-built ruin. Sometimes it looks like total technical success paired with total practical failure. A tunnel that works perfectly, built exactly as designed, that simply arrived into a world that no longer needed, permitted, or could legally use it. The lesson isn't that tunnels are bad investments, it's that the multi-decade gap between approving something underground and finishing it is one of the most dangerous blind spots in modern infrastructure planning. A gap wide enough for the world to change completely while the drilling continues unaware beneath it. It also matters because tunnels are disproportionately used for exactly the kind of infrastructure societies most urgently need: cross-border freight corridors, dense city transit expansion, flood and utility corridors beneath already built neighborhoods where there's no surface alternative. These are precisely the categories of project where a decade-long regulatory or political gap is most likely, because they require the most jurisdictions, the most safety scrutiny, and the most long-range financial commitment to agree simultaneously, meaning the projects with the greatest potential public benefit are also structurally the ones most exposed to this specific kind of stranding. Some transportation agencies have started building regulatory contingency directly into tunnel design, engineering ventilation and safety margins well beyond current code, anticipating that codes will tighten before the tunnel opens, at meaningfully higher upfront cost but far lower risk of ending up stranded. Others have begun sequencing megaprojects differently, refusing to break ground on the tunnel itself until every connecting piece of infrastructure and every layer of jurisdictional approval is locked in. trading years of additional planning time for a much lower chance of a finished tunnel sitting dark. But for the tunnels already sealed and waiting, the honest outlook is bleak. Reopening one after years of legal and regulatory limbo requires resolving the exact tangle of politics, financing, and jurisdiction that stalled it in the first place, and every year that passes makes the original business case and the original political coalition that approved it harder to reassemble. A small number of stranded tunnels have found unexpected second lives, repurposed not for their original transit or vehicle use, but for utility conduits, data cable runs, or emergency flood storage, functions that require far less regulatory approval than moving people or freight through them. It's an outcome the original engineers never designed for, and a modest one compared to the ambition the tunnel was built with. But it's often the only economically rational way to extract any value at all from a structure that otherwise sits idle indefinitely. Somewhere below that city, the ventilation fans still get tested on schedule, the lights still get checked, a tunnel that took a decade and $1 billion to build remains, in every technical sense ready, waiting for a permission slip that may never arrive. It isn't a ruin. It's something more unsettling. Proof that a project can do everything right, on time and to code, and still lose to the one thing no engineer can control: how much the world above it changes while the drilling continues below.